little introduction, some myth busting, kind of talk how the savings fits in the model. If you have not had the opportunity to look at the business rules, it's kind of a quick down and dirty on it. Then I'm going to walk you through the project savings calculator and give you a step-by-step on how we're doing it and how we're using it or planning to use it for this year's camp cycle. So myth busting. Have you heard the myth that the Energy Focus Fund is going away? So while the Energy Focus Fund is going away in the sense that we're no longer going to have a set-aside pot of money to fund energy requirements out of, quite the contrary, energy is becoming more important because every single project out there now is going to have a component that is tied to energy and tied to savings. So while the set-aside fund is gone, every project and every investment decision we make is going to have a savings component to it going forward. Another myth that the energy managers might be thinking out there or might have heard is we can't use BLCC anymore. The Building Life Cycle Cost Program. All of our energy managers are familiar with it because that's what we've been using for our energy focus funds for the last couple of years. That is not the truth. That is a myth. We are going to keep using BLCC, and if you have the capability at the base, we are going to encourage you to use it. We've created the Project Savings Calculator as an additional tool, an additional resource for you to utilize if you don't have the capacity or capability at the base to use BLCC. Because it is a little more in-depth program, it takes a little more expertise. So this Project Savings Calculator is intended to make it easy on you. Another one, another myth that came in when we sent out our first iteration of the business rules is we aren't focused on the best savings requirement, meaning that in the risk-based requirements, if you have an SIR of 4 versus an SIR of 2, you don't get more points in the model. Well, that's not entirely true. You don't get more points in the risk model because the risk piece of the model is based on risk, and we don't want savings to drive up requirements in that model. But on the flip side of that, we are going to identify all of those high SIR requirements, and we're going to lump them together and give visibility on them to our senior leadership at the CE Council so that they can make decisions on whether or not to include them in our investment decisions. And the last one is AFCEC built this thing in a box, and there's some installations out there that would attest or would disagree with that. We have had folks at all levels, MAGCOM, air staff, as well as installations, trying out the Project Savings Calculator, looking over our proposed ideas on how we address savings as part of our whole program. And so we've had a lot of minds working on this to make it better. And with that, it's open. We know this isn't a perfect product, so if you want to help us, please reach out to us, and we're interested in good ideas and making it good, better for the entire Air Force. So how does savings play into the model? Two-prong approach. Cost savings for risk-based projects. So that basically means that 5% of the total score on a risk-based requirement is going to be dedicated to savings. So every single SRM project will have a standard savings calculation. We're going to measure all O&M projects, energy cost factors, demolition. It's all going to be part of it, and we're going to want to verify that. The savings calculations that we're using. So bottom line though on the risk side is that risk will drive a model, and then we'll use savings kind of as a tiebreaker for the last 10 points of the model. On the other side of it you have savings as a strategic goal, and that's where I was talking earlier about the high SIR requirements. They're not going to necessarily have a high risk. It might be something that is just simply a good investment because it's going to pay itself off in a year, and we're going to be able to use those dollars we were spending elsewhere in our program. So it just makes sense to fund those. And over there on the right side, you can see a draft IPL priorities where it says 26 is a savings-only Tier 1. It might be a group of requirements with SIR between 2 and 4. And then we might hit another R&M project before we get to the next savings tier. But the purpose is to lump those together in similar SIRs and to present those to our leadership and let them tell us where they would like to insert it. Because it's important. Important because those projects, if we insert a chunk of them here or there on the IPL, it's going to push something else off the bottom. And that could be a runway at a MAGCOM. And so that MAGCOM needs to speak up and let everyone know if they're comfortable with that runway falling off the list to address these savings requirements. So that's the intent, is to arm our leadership with objective criteria that they can use to make investment decisions for us. So what does this look like? You might have seen this risk matrix before if you've tuned into any of the other webinars. But you see on the top right is basically a high consequence of failure and a high probability of failure in that red box. So a lot of our good requirements, our high risk requirements, are all going to compete up there. You can also notice that there's a different size bubbles throughout the chart. And that bubble is essentially tied to the SIR. So the higher the SIR, the bigger the bubble. So while it makes sense to fund everything in the top right, it may also make sense to fund those that are labeled number 8 and number 9. They might not have a high risk score, but you can tell that their SIR is extremely high, and so they're going to be a good investment. So those are the kind of items that we're going to identify and want to group together and potentially pull up to as a funded requirement on the IPPL. All right, so that's kind of how we're touching on savings and how it's going to be part of the IPPL. Now with respect to the project savings calculator, as I mentioned before I walk you through the project savings calculator, the best method we have so far is the Building Lifecycle Cost Program. It's the Department of Energy Commission program. It's what they're using. It's what we've been using to manage our energy program over the last few years. We know it works, and we're confident in the results. So by all means, if you can do that at the base, do it. Calculate an SIR just like you would for an energy project and plug it into ACES. It's as easy as that. But if you can't do it, if you lack the expertise or capacity at the installation, or if you want to add a few more projects to the IPPL, I say that because you'll see here when we walk through, the project savings calculator is very quick. It's an easy process to create a savings from our requirements. So you should be able to do it quickly. And if there's a few projects at the bottom that you just don't have time to add a BLCC and calculate a SIR from BLCC, then go ahead and use the project savings calculator. And the last comment there, it's not perfect, and we know it's not perfect. This is just the start. Our end goal is to merge the best parts of BLCC with the best parts of this calculator so that you at the installation have one product to use. But we're not there yet, so that's why you have the ability to use both. But understand it's not perfect, and again, as you use this product, we're looking for feedback to tell us how we can make it better for you. So with that, I'm going to switch here from the slides and share my screen where I have basically opened up the project savings calculator, and I want to walk you through a sample project and how easy it is to basically create and calculate your SIR. So again, this is not all notional data I'm going to plug in here, but this is for you to look at. And the project savings calculator is out on the CE portal in the integration program group, same place as the business rules, so you can open it up there after this meeting and take a look for yourself. Before we get started, I'm going to just a little navigation here. You see at the bottom there's an input tab and a summary tab. The input tab is where you're going to be putting in all your information. That's where we're going to populate project-specific data. The summary tab is the output. It has a bunch of different things, and you'll see on the back end when we do this. But the key we're looking for at this time is the savings to investment ratio highlighted there in yellow. But again, there's a lot more to this file than is shown. I've hidden a lot of tabs, so for folks out there that like to look at the code and how we're doing some of the calculations, you can unhide those tabs, and you see a list here now of all the buildup that is basically creating this project. It's hidden though to make it easier and more user-friendly for folks getting into it. I also want to point out in the top right, a corner of each tab is a help feature. This help feature has drop-downs in it, and those drop-downs you can go and pull down and look at different factors, different help topics to see what's out there, and if you have any questions on any of the input that we're putting in. So that's out there for you to use. So with that, I'm going to get started and just basically populate this spreadsheet and kind of so you can see how we're doing it. So the first two, project number and project name. Those are going to be directly from ACES. So you're just going to put in your project number from ACES. And again, like I said, this is a made-up number for me, a made-up project, but I just want to give you an example. So repair roof, and we'll say repair HVAC in Hangar 62, which is an admin building. Location is the location of your installation, location of your project. And this is used to create an area cost factor to adjust pricing. The pricing in here is based on mean, so it adjusts accordingly. So you simply go in there and pick the best location or closest location to you if your installation is not there. You see all the CONUS stuff up top, and then at the bottom, for everyone that's a lot of you on this call, there are OCONUS locations that you can go find the best spot for, or excuse me, the closest location to you. For us, this project is at JBSA Randolph here in San Antonio. So I'm going to go ahead and use Texas, San Antonio. Construction start year, that's the fiscal year. This will be for the FY15. And then duration, we'll say this is a 6-month project. So that's it. That's all you need to put for Section A. On to Section B, the proposed acquisition costs. So in Section B, you see here a method B1, method B2 for estimation method. So if for a facility requirement, you can use B1 or B2. For payments, utilities, only B2 is enabled for you to use. But what the difference is, if you have a rough estimate, you're not comfortable with the estimate, this calculator will create an estimate for you based on facility parameters and the type of work we're doing in the facility. So if you're not comfortable with the engineer's estimate you have on the front end, use method B1. If you are comfortable with B2 or the estimate, then go ahead and use B2. If you have a design with a solid design CWE, use that number and you can manually populate that data below. We're going to go ahead and use method B1 so you can kind of see how that works. Project type, you see new facility for Milcon, facility alteration for a normal renovation type project, and you have payments, utility, and demolition. So I'm going to zoom in a little. I think some folks are having trouble seeing there. Hopefully you can see that a little better. So project type, as I just mentioned, this will be a facility alteration since we're fixing the roof and the HVAC. Next one down is facility type. Okay, you can see in here, this is simple. What type of facility are you working in? And there's a bunch of different types in there. Again, click the one that's closest to you. While I mentioned this was a hangar, it's actually been converted to an admin facility on Randolph. It's actually the CE headquarters, so we'll call it a multi-purpose administration. Year built, whatever you have in the 7115, use that data. Same for here for the gross square footage. In this case, technological update. This is basically going to adjust your cost based on complexity of the project. This one as well as technical complexity level. So for technological update, I'm going to go in there and look at the options. Again, this is an admin facility, so that's what I'll click. But you can see some of the different factors. Hospital or medical, they're a little more complex and going to cost us a little more. So that's why they're separated out in there. So I'll use administrative facility, and I'm going to call it a none in terms of technical complexity. And then design process, either concept or pre-concept or concept. I'll say we have a concept design on this. So I'm done there. I'm going to go over to facility alteration parameters. Some questions came up when the business rules were released on this as well. This is not the scope of work, so it does not need to add up to 100%. What we're looking here is at each individual system and how much of that system are you modifying. So in this example, we're going to replace the entire roof, so I'm going to use 100%. If I was replacing half the roof, I would use 50% and so on. And then similarly, we'll say we were replacing 75% of the HVAC, doing nothing else in the building. Again, this is based on your scope of work. You take a look at that, and you insert these percentages based on what you're actually doing. So I'm done there. You can add zeros. You don't need to because you can see down here in the acquisition costs, it's calculated out for me. It says it's $1 million for this requirement. All right, so now I'm done with the proposed acquisition costs. I'm going to go to my baseline recurring costs in Section C. Baseline recurring costs are based on historical data that we have out there in IWIMS, or maybe it's your utility your utility engineer. But we're looking for good data, for the real data to populate here. So I'm going back the last 2 fiscal years, and I'm just going to start populating some data in here. Again, I mentioned this is not real data for me. I'm making these numbers up. So don't take that, as gospel here. This is just to demonstrate how the how the tool works. And you can see down here preventative maintenance, corrective maintenance. We're pulling that straight out of IWIMS based on that facility. And so if you have folks at the base that aren't comfortable with IWIMS, if your ops engineers aren't comfortable with it, go to the operation engineering playbook on the CE portal. We have videos out there and tutorials out there that will tell you exactly how to pull some of this IWIMS data. So while I do that, bear with me while I just throw some numbers in here to populate our costs so that we can demonstrate how the tool works. Again, as I'm doing this operation, so what we're looking for there is your PEC 79 type costs in a facility. So that might be your service contracts. It might be so your custodial or your refuse. Maybe you have some elevator maintenance, different contracts in the facility. So that's what we're looking for there. Energy is based on usage. So if you have a meter facility, your kilowatt hours times your utility rate there at that location to do an estimate. Some areas may not have that available data, and if you go up to the help topics, it'll help explain what to do if that is the case for your facility. So again, I'm going to throw these numbers in there. About done. And so there we have it. So now I have my baseline costs, again, real costs in there for historical costs, and then you can see to the right it's calculating a baseline recurring cost. And so what that's essentially doing is accounting for inflation and averaging those costs over the last 2 years. And we use 2 years because that's the data that we have readily available to us in IWIMS. And then you can see D, proposed costs. That is essentially calculating our savings based on the type of work we're doing above and how much of the work is affected in each shop code and with respect to the facility itself. Finally, down at the bottom, E is our additional consideration. So we've third-party funds here. What we're talking about there, I added this after this morning's webinar, but non-Air Force dollars, maybe it's DLA, AFCEC, or customer-funded requirements. Maybe a user is funding a portion of a renovation, and we're taking care of the infrastructure. And also rebates. This is where we would try to capture rebates. Maybe you're going to get a rebate from the utility company for changing out some old chillers for more efficient ones. So that's where that would be captured there in third-party funds, and it would just be a dollar amount, 100,000 or whatever it is. For our case, we're going to say it's 0. We have none for this example. And then the last one is Red Horse execution. Simply, if you're executing via Red Horse, go ahead and check this. And what that's doing is calculating the savings. So we know from historical data that it's typically close to 20% cheaper to execute through Red Horse than by a contract. So we want to be able to capture those savings if we're using Red Horse as our execution vehicle. And a question came up from USAFE this morning. This would also tie to our PRTC type requirements and similar constructs where we're doing it with in-house resources versus by a contract. And that's it. So we have added everything we need to calculate our SIR. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next tab, the summary tab, and take a look. So as I mentioned, it would populate for us. You can see the graph here. Is basically projecting what our costs would have been had we done nothing versus the blue, what our projected costs going forward are going to be because of some of that work we've done in the facility. And then the key area is this, what's highlighted in yellow is 0.68. That is your SIR. So we're going to take that SIR value, that decimal just as it is, and we're going to populate that in ACES. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at the business rules, take a look at them at this piece specifically so you can see where to populate it. But in ACES, there's the other cost tab is where we're tracking this, and we want you to plug that decimal just as it's shown in there. You don't need to multiply it by any factors to calculate the points. We'll do that after the fact. And so that's it. That's how you use the tool. It's that simple. When you're done and you have it, our recommendation is to go forward here, print the file to a PDF, and save it so that you have that data, and we can use it for validation in the event we need it later on. So that's it on the savings calculator. I'm going to switch back over to the main PowerPoint here. So stand by 1 second. All right, so you should see the slides again on your end. Might take a second. And that's it. That's a big piece that I wanted to talk about on the savings webinar. Now, I wanted to lay this slide out there, print this one out if you did earlier in the week, but this is our future webinars coming up. We have one for transportation, the pavements guys. We have one for programming coming up, and we also have one for our environmental quality. So tune into those to get more information. And as I mentioned before, these are all being recorded. It might take a couple days to get them out there, but we're going to be posting them to the Air Force YouTube site so that you can take a look at these and reuse them if they're useful to you. So with that is all I wanted to cover. So I'd like to open the door to questions, and so keep them coming in the chat box, and I'm going to kind of go in order and start answering them for you.
So the first question is from Randy Beckett. He says, how do you do parent-child projects or phased projects in the FYR calculator?
So the question from Randy Beckett, how do you do parent-child projects or phased projects? And I'm assuming you mean a multi-year type requirement, as in we're going to do phase 1 this year and then we're going to do phase 2 next year. If you could verify that would be good. But we would treat those as individual requirements in terms of calculating our SIR.
Okay. How do you input, same individual, how do you input contract by requester project?
How do you input contract by requester projects? So a contract by requester coming in from a customer that wants to, say for example, I'm sure you guys have never experienced this, but you know, a wing commander never wants to renovate his conference room or anything. But say a contract by requester project like that. So if it's an unfunded requirement, so meaning that they're not bringing funds to the table, then we would consider it like we would all of our other projects, and we would assess it a risk score. So we look at it based on its probability of failure, so based on the condition of whatever that requirement is, to see how it scores out, and then we would look at it based on the consequence of failure, so based on the MDI of that facility as well as the match comp priority. That's going to give it its risk-based score. The only time a project like that would compete well is if it scores well in both of those categories, or if we're doing some awesome savings type things and so it pays for itself. But other than that, a contract by requester that's coming in may not score that high.
Okay, so same from Randy Beckett. For use of 3,600 Air Force funds, do they go into the third-party funding box?
So for use of 3,600 Air Force funds, do they go, the question, yeah, for use of 3,600 Air Force funds, do they go into the third-party fund box? And I would have to, the answer to that would be yes if they're being used to offset our acquisition cost. So that's what we're trying to capture there, is essentially offsets to our acquisition costs, so that the whole, the key is that the centralized program is not going to necessarily be funding the full requirement. So if we have money coming in from some other area, then it's going to offset the amount of centralized funds that we have to use so that we can use them in other areas of our program. So hopefully I answered that one for you.
Okay, explain where in ACES PM the fields for SIR for non-energy projects.
So for all projects in this camp cycle, and again, I would encourage you, if you haven't read the business rules, I know it's a long document, but zoom into the savings portion and you'll see specific guidance in there of where to do this. But in ACES, under the Other Costs tab, there are some new drop-downs loaded, and one of them is there for basically a savings to investment ratio. So you pick that drop-down, you put in the SIR, then I mentioned the decimal, the one that the calculator spits out, and that will be your SIR for that requirement. You also want to put, there's a comments there. In the comment, we recommend that you put either BLCC or project savings calculator for the method of determining that SIR.
Okay, so back to Mr. Beckett. PBR project, contract by requester. Do we cost out the equipment part of the project or just the real property in the model?
So the question from Mr. Beckett is, do we cost out the equipment part of the project or just the real property in the model? And my answer to that would be, what are we paying for? Like, so for example, is this maybe some flight simulators where we're providing infrastructure support to? And if that's the case and we're not buying the equipment as being purchased with 3080 money, I would not include that in our requirement. Just include the real property piece that we're actually funding and doing internally. I see one there from Gerald Pennell at Beal. Can you please repeat where one can download the SIR calculator? So the SIR calculator is in two spots right now, on the C portal and the integration program group under the business rules in the same folder as the business rules. You can find a copy of it there. And just today it has been downloaded to the Ops Engineering playbook on the C portal as well. So I would encourage you to visit it at either location. But again, if you haven't been to the Ops Engineering playbook, go take a look at it, because we've added a lot of good things there, a lot of good resources for you to look at and kind of get a better understanding of where we're headed. So that's all we have in the chat box. Are there any other questions out there? Again, this isn't it. This isn't all you're going to hear from us. There's other webinars out there, and please give me a call if you have anything, any questions, any ideas, or if you want to help us make this better. We have nothing to hide here. We're trying to make it the best we can, and we need the folks in the field to help us do that. But if that's it, we'll go ahead and call it a day. Again, thanks for listening in, and enjoy the rest of your day. We're out here.